August 22, 1959. It is a Saturday evening, and the old Trinity Mission is hosting a teenage dance, a record hop, in which Kilmer Myers Lower East Side Neighborhood Association is the major sponsor. Members of various neighborhood gangs were invited to attend in a show of peace. The understanding was that the dance hall itself was the location of a cool, a truce halting, at least temporarily, physical confrontations between opposing gangs. However, just 2 days before the dance, on that Thursday of August 20, 1959, 17-year-old Miguel Castro, a leader of the Sportsmen, and John Cruz, also 17 years old, engaged in a fistfight. Cruz was the leader of the Forsyth Street Boys. The outcome of that fight is disputed, with newspaper accounts after the tragic events to follow stating that Castro got the best of John Cruz. Other accounts dispute this, noting Cruz, one of 6 siblings living with his twice-married single mother, Carmen Marquez, had actually been a competitive amateur boxer in Puerto Rico. Regardless of the outcome of that fight, it was just one more step towards tragedy days later. Both gang leaders would figure prominently in the events to come, which, 2 days after the fistfight, would escalate, ironically enough, at that teen record hop, which Myers and his Lower East Side Neighborhood Association had intended to curb gang violence. At the Saturday dance, 2 days later, a boy, whose name is now lost to history, a member of the Sportsmen, added fuel to the growing fire by dancing with a Deb, a girl gang member who belonged to the Forsyth Street Boys. A heated argument ensued between the two groups over the Sportsman boys dancing with a Forsyth girl. However, in observance of 1950s New York youth gang protocol, as the dance was the location of a cool, a temporary truce, settlement of this perceived act of disrespect would have to wait until after the dance. That wait wouldn't be long in coming. The following morning, Sunday, August 23, 1959, 10:30 a.m., Sarah Delano Park, officially a public space. Unofficially, the park was deep into Forsyth Street Boys' turf or territory. Miguel Castro would lead a group of about 8 or so sportsmen in a raid, japping, according to 1950s New York youth gang parlance. John Cruz would be struck in the head with a car antenna, and he and Castro would have another fight. The outcome of this Sunday morning fight is not in dispute, with Cruz utilizing his boxing experience to not only recover from the cutting blow of the car aerial, but with assistance from his Forsyths, drive off the attacking sportsman. A Deb of the Forsyths would later go to the Palestine Theater that afternoon, which was a part of Sportsman turf. Spying in, she overheard some members of the Sportsmen angrily working themselves up for another raid into Forsyth turf at Sarah Delano Park. The girl promptly returned to Forsyth turf, informing John Cruz and the other Forsyths that another raid by the Sportsmen, a retaliatory strike for their initial failed attempt that morning, was coming later in the night. The Forsyths had a nylon 22 rifle as part of their arsenal, held in possession by another of their leaders, 17-year-old Nestor Juan Cintron. Cruz retrieved it and strategically hid the rifle in the park. The Sportsmen did indeed return to the park that evening, armed with their improvised firearms, zip guns, as well as knives. But the Forsyths were ready. Cruz took out the hidden rifle and fired. The Sportsmen also fired their zip guns and made use of their knives. In the ensuing and violently confusing melee, 14-year-old Forsyth Julio Rosario would be mortally wounded, stabbed in the back. An 11-year-old innocent bystander taking an evening ride in his bike, Manuel Cintron, would be shot in the face. 17-year-old Luis Santos would also be shot, and another 14-year-old stabbing victim, Victor Gonzalez, would join Julio Rosario stabbed by 13-year-old sportsman member Samuel Adams before his fellow invading sportsmen, led by Miguel Castro, would run off in the face of the Forsyths' counterattack. Like all real-life armed battles, the affair was brutal, bloody, and a complete mess. Emotions also were running high, regardless of who won or who lost the encounter. With his blood running hot, particularly with the stabbing of Julio Rosario, ostensibly a surrogate younger brother of Cruz's gang under his protection, the 17-year-old gang leader then gathered several of his Forsyths for a vengeance raid into Avenue D, the heart of sportsman turf. Armed with a nylon 22 rifle, as well as improvised Molotov cocktail firebombs, they piled themselves into a car and angrily sped off towards the Lillian-Walled housing projects, the heart of sportsman turf. At the Lillian-Walled housing projects, outreach workers from Kilmer-Myers Lower East Side Neighborhood Association had called an impromptu gathering attended by about 20 or so local teenagers. Emotions were also running high there since the dance that previous night, and Lena's outreach workers were calling on the teens to keep the peace, the raid at the park having just occurred and still unknown to them. Among the gathered teens were 16-year-old Robert Combs, 15-year-old Ernestine Singleton, and another 15-year-old girl, Teresa G., the former girlfriend of Frank Brother Boyd, a leader in the sportsman gang whose criminal record and reputation for brutality and ruthlessness contrasted with Teresa's reputation as a serious-minded high school student with plans for eventually getting into healthcare and out of the hood. Cruz and his Forsyth Street boys drove up around the corner and quietly got out, Cruz's rifle in hand, their presence undetected by the crowd in front of the housing projects. With a gesture, Cruz signaled his boys to toss the lighted cocktails, igniting the night sky and setting flame to the bench where the group of teens had milled about. With screams of panic, the teens ran. Several shots rang out from Cruz's gun, the first to the pavement and the second in the air, scattering the teens, as if the fire at the bench wouldn't do the job. Then he started firing into the crowd. Ernestine Singleton was felled with a shot that tore into her hip, dropping her to the pavement while she screamed in agony. Robert Combs would be shot and wounded. Teresa G., on the other hand, didn't have time to scream in agony. Cruz's bullet ripped into her skull. She was dead when she hit the pavement. Cruz and his Forsyth Street boys would flee the scene of the crime, but less dramatic than what is usually depicted in many 1950s fictional juvenile delinquent movies, he would be picked up at his home. When informed of the charges against him, Cruz would, tearfully, state that he didn't know that he was shooting at a girl.